I was in the kitchen when my fiancée's phone buzzed. Thanks for last night. Same time tomorrow. She saw me read it. I just nodded and canceled every wedding payment. I was in the kitchen at 6:40 a.m., standing over the kettle and thinking about chair counts, when her phone lit up next to the fruit bowl. The screen showed a preview long enough to erase the rest of the morning. Thanks for last night. Same time tomorrow. She stepped into the doorway while I was still looking at it. My hand didn't move. Her eyes went to the phone, then to me. I didn't demand an explanation. I lifted my chin once and set the kettle down like nothing in the room had changed. That was the last normal second of our engagement. Silence is not empty. It gives you space to sort pieces quickly. I did not aim for a confession. I aimed for leverage and an exit that wouldn't set my life on fire. I cleaned the counter, slid her phone back to the exact angle, and unlocked my laptop. Our vendor spreadsheet was still open from the night before. All the cells looked like calm water. Deposit sent. Final balances due this week. Cancellation windows closing like elevator doors. I started with the venue because it would hurt the most if I missed the deadline. The contract had a clause that buried a lifeline in legal gravel. Cancellations within 10 business days forfeit half unless there is a vendor failure, force majeure, or a mutually agreed reschedule. I called and spoke like a groom who had just learned about a family emergency. I used dates, not feelings. I used clear sentences and no pauses. By the end of the call, we had a reschedule note on file and the final charge frozen. A manager confirmed an email was on its way. The first wall fell without a sound. The floors came next. I referenced a sudden supply issue and requested a pause. The owner was sympathetic in that brisk, transactional way small businesses learn to be. She offered to hold the order if I could confirm by Friday. I thanked her, gave an alternate number, and removed the card from autopay while we were still on the line. The baker added a test of character I didn't expect. She asked if everything was okay with us. I said the schedule was moving. It wasn't a lie. When she went to shower, I opened our joint calendar and the wedding portal where all the vendor access lived. I changed my email to primary contact and set her permissions to view only. No alarms rang. No angry pop-ups warned me about sabotage. The portal just accepted the change and put me alone at the wheel of an expensive plan. Refunds need somewhere to land. I moved cash from the wedding savings into an account in my name that had existed for years but never had a nickname. I set up incoming transfer alerts that would ping me instantly. I requested check refunds wherever possible. Money you can hold is money nobody can claw back when they decide to be heroic after the truth shows up. It only took a minute to forward a screenshot of the text to a private email and stash a copy on a thumb drive. Not for revenge porn or group chat spectacle. I wanted context protected from sudden phone resets and performative tears. One image, one timestamp, one clean thread that could be attached to other evidence without turning the whole thing into a circus. The officiant was easy. A professional calendar doesn't argue. I pushed the date out 6 months and flagged it as tentative. The string quartet was polite but firm. Cancellations inside 2 weeks required a partial fee. I accepted it and logged the loss without emotion. The photographer surprised me. He offered to apply our deposit to a future event. Any event, no questions asked. I took the credit, asked for a written note, and placed it in a folder labeled changes, then mirrored that folder to Cloud and Drive. I avoided second-guessing. Speed mattered more than clean edges. When she came out in a towel, I poured her coffee and slid it to her side of the table. Her eyes searched my face for something sharp. I gave her nothing. She sipped once, stared at the steam, and faked a yawn that didn't land. She left the cup half full and went to get dressed. The moment she closed the bedroom door, I canceled the honeymoon flights. The itinerary had a generous grace period. The refund confirmation hit my inbox in under a minute. I printed it like a receipt for sanity and placed it under the changes folder, which was getting heavier by the hour. I took a personal day without telling her. I said I had errands in town and left early. Errands, as it turned out, included a visit to the bank to freeze the wedding debit card, a call to the rental company to halt the tux order, and a brisk walk to the registry showroom to stop deliveries before they started. Every vendor rep had the same rhythm. Name, date, contract number, a beat of surprise, then a path either to reschedule or refund. I used it all like a map, moving from one point to the next without letting the morning's text pull me into theatrical questions. I needed context about the sender that didn't require private investigators or illegal spyware. Patterns tell their own story if you ask the right questions. I opened our rideshare history and looked for the repetition nobody expects you to check. Same pickup points, same drop-off, same time bands on weeknights that have been labeled late meetings. I exported the log into a clean sheet and highlighted clusters. 3 weeks of Tuesday and Thursday evenings lined up in a grid as neat as a diagram. The hotels were not boutique or cute. They were the kind you choose for convenience and anonymity. I pulled cell bills that had not yet been buried under autopay. Numbers repeat too. There it was, a contact that never appeared in her visible chats, but rang in consistent windows. I saved the number, didn't call it, and ran it through a reverse lookup service that only tells you basics. The result returned a carrier in an area city not far from her office corridor. I noted it, then stopped. If I chased that detail without structure, I would get lost in a maze of maybes and come out angrier with nothing to show. At noon, I sat in a coffee shop and reviewed the wedding budget like a forensic accountant. I colored each line according to its current status: paused, refunded, converted to credit, or sunk. I wrote a single sentence next to each vendor about why the decision had been made. If anyone asked later, I could recount the morning without drifting into emotion. The sheet looked clinical by design. It made me feel like the adult in the room while my personal life tripped over itself behind a closed door. The first unexpected break didn't arrive from software. It came from a person who didn't know the role they were playing. The venue coordinator replied to my reschedule request and copied the catering manager. The manager replied all to confirm menus could be held, and accidentally left in a line about the bride's tasting appointment scheduled for the next afternoon. The calendar invite attached to that email had a private note. It included an extra tasting guest marked only as +1, with a comment about finalizing their selections. No names, no drama, just grammar doing me a favor. I confirmed the reschedule in that thread with polite efficiency and attached a new suggested date. Then I called the manager directly and asked an innocuous question about the tasting policy. Could +1s make final decisions if one partner was absent? The answer was yes, as long as the couple had signed the initial proposal. I thanked her and hung up with a picture I didn't love, but could use. If tomorrow's guest showed up beside her again, the pattern would be durable enough to act on without a confession. Back at home, I placed a blank notepad on the counter and wrote a list titled Aftermath. It wasn't for revenge. It was for the practical fallout nobody warns you about. Return gifts that had already come early. Unsend the wedding website to late invitees. Cancel block holds at the hotel. Draft a short, neutral statement for when people asked what happened. I hadn't decided if I would ever use it. Writing it kept me steady. By late afternoon, half the budget was frozen, a quarter was refunded or credited, and the rest was either small enough to absorb or already sunk. Emotion tried to crawl back into the room every few minutes. I kept it outside by giving my hands more tasks. I collected physical items that would confuse me if I stared at them: table markers, a decorative sign, ribbon swatches, and put them in a labeled box. I printed a fresh copy of the budget summary and taped it inside the box lid. If I opened it again, I would see numbers, not nostalgia. She texted to say she would be late after all. I did not respond right away. I drove to the venue at the time her calendar note suggested and walked the grounds like a stranger scouting places to stand. I memorized entrances, staff corridors, and the line of sight from the lobby to the tasting room. I wasn't planning a sting. I was setting up competence for whatever came next. A person who knows the layout holds the advantage when surprises try to pick the time. When I got home, the apartment was the same shape, but carried a faint echo like rooms get after a fight. She was on the couch scrolling with that determined focus people wear when they're trying to look casual. I made dinner like any other weekday. I asked about her day in a normal voice. She answered with a short list of tasks and an invented annoyance about a printer jam. I did not chase the printer. I washed dishes, set out the trash, and checked that my thumb drive was still in its pocket. Before bed, I completed the last move I had promised myself that morning. I opened a new document labeled Statement and wrote one paragraph in plain language. It said the wedding had been postponed due to private reasons, that all vendors had been notified, and that further details would not be shared. I printed it, folded it, and slid it under the changes folder. Then I turned off the lamp and stared at the ceiling until the numbers I had moved around all day stopped arranging themselves into shapes. The silence between us was not a truce. It was a runway. By the time the sun came back, I had ended every payment that could still be saved, gathered the first pieces of a pattern, and marked a point on the calendar where truth would have to show up on time. The morning after the text, she left for work earlier than usual. Her goodbye was rushed, her voice light but not relaxed. I watched from the window as she walked down the street, phone already in her hand, head bent in focus. I didn't follow. I had other tools. I began with the tasting appointment the venue coordinator had accidentally revealed. It was set for noon. I arrived at the venue 30 minutes early, parking far enough away to watch without being obvious. Staff carried trays through the lobby while sunlight glared off the glass doors. At 12 sharp, she walked in wearing a dress I'd never seen, hairstyled like she was attending a function rather than meeting a caterer. A man followed close behind, tall, dark suit, no tie. carrying himself like the place was his living room. They didn't linger in the lobby. The coordinator greeted them, ushered them into the tasting room, and closed the door. I didn't need photos. I just needed the man's face locked in my memory. They stayed inside for 45 minutes. When they emerged, she carried a small box, likely leftover samples. They left together, laughing at something he said, walking toward the parking lot on the far side of the building. I noted the direction of his car and waited until they were gone before I left my spot. That afternoon, I ran his face through a facial search tool designed for journalists. It took 10 minutes to get a match from a corporate press release. His name appeared beside a job title, Regional Sales Director, and a company logo. Married. Public profile photos with his wife and 2 kids. The same face I'd just seen walking out with mine. That was my first solid link. She was with someone else consistently enough for him to appear in her professional sphere, and his family existed as collateral damage. I didn't go straight to his wife. Not yet. I needed the rest of the map. Next step, her calendar. She used a cloud-synced one, linked to our shared grocery list, so I could see most of her events. The trick was the private label she sometimes used for work meetings. I exported 3 months' worth of those entries, compared them to the rideshare logs I'd pulled yesterday, and found the overlap. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, plus a few Friday lunch hours. Same 2 addresses, the downtown hotel and a steakhouse a block from his office. To verify without tipping her off, I called a friend who worked at a bar across the street from that steakhouse. I kept it casual, asked if he'd seen her around recently. He didn't hesitate. Yeah, with some guy in a suit. They came in after dinner last Thursday. Looked pretty comfortable. That put my mental tally at 4 independent confirmations of the same connection. While the pattern was building, I kept dismantling the wedding. The band was next. I told them the event was postponed indefinitely and asked for their cancellation policy. They agreed to a partial refund and, more importantly, removed the date from their schedule. The makeup artist was trickier. She insisted on keeping a non-refundable booking fee, but agreed to release the date. Every call, every contract adjustment, felt like removing another brick from the structure she thought still stood. That evening, she came home humming a tune, probably from the restaurant. She asked about my day without looking directly at me. I gave her nothing but the basics. Errands, a meeting, traffic. She nodded, disappeared into the bedroom, and locked the door while she changed. I stayed at the kitchen table, marking red lines through the budget sheet. The following morning, I decided to confirm his car. I still remembered where he'd parked at the venue. A quick search of DMV public info, not detailed records, just plate verification through a parking app, matched the name I'd found online. That small piece gave me a way to track him without needing to follow them physically. If his car appeared in her building's lot or near her office after hours, I'd know. 3 days later, it did. Thursday, 8:17 p.m., parked across the street from her apartment block while she claimed to be at a client dinner. I didn't wait outside to see more. I just logged the sighting and added it to the pattern. By now, I had enough to go to his wife. I found her through his corporate page, where she was tagged in a charity event photo. Cross-referencing her name brought up a small business profile. I drafted a short, anonymous message with dates and locations, ending with, "This is not rumor. Decide for yourself how you want to confirm." I sent it from a burner email and closed the tab. 2 days passed with no visible ripple. She was unusually cheerful during that time. Even suggested we take a walk to look at decor ideas for the reception. I agreed, mentally noting how easily she slipped between worlds. We spent an hour pretending to discuss flowers while, in my head, I was cataloging her tells. The way she glanced at her phone every time it buzzed, the way her smile tightened when a text arrived mid-sentence. On Sunday evening, the ripple finally came. My burner email got a reply. It was short. I know. Meeting with my lawyer tomorrow. Thank you. No names, no drama. But it told me the message had landed, which meant the outer layer of her secret life was about to split open. I decided the next phase wasn't confrontation, it was acceleration. I contacted the caterer, citing a change in guest count as a reason to scale down. When they asked for a new number, I gave them 0 and requested a full cancellation under our minimum guarantee clause. They hesitated, then agreed to a 75% refund. The money cleared into my private account 2 days later. At the same time, I canceled our block of hotel rooms reserved for out-of-town guests. The release was instant. Every couple who'd booked under our code got an automated email saying the block was no longer available. I knew it would filter back to her through the first friend or cousin who tried to rebook. That was the point. Small, confusing gaps in her narrative that she couldn't fill without confronting me. The first sign she felt the ground shifting came midweek. She mentioned getting a call from her cousin about the hotel. She asked if I'd changed something. I told her I was reviewing arrangements to keep costs down. She didn't push. but her expression lingered, calculating. Thursday night, she stayed late again. I didn't bother tracking her. I already had enough. Instead, I spent the evening compiling a master timeline of every verified sighting, ride, and event, cross-referenced with our shared plans. The overlap was undeniable. By Friday morning, the quiet tension I had been cultivating was ready to snap. The caterer refund cleared overnight. The florist sent a follow-up email asking if the new date had been confirmed. I didn't respond. Instead, I packed the master timeline, vendor receipts, and budget sheet into a single folder and left it in my work bag. If the day went how I expected, I'd need them. At 9:12 a.m., I got the first call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked, it was the hotel night manager I'd spoken to earlier in my research, the one who had quietly confirmed her visits with him. His message was short. You might want to come by tonight. I think you'll want to see this for yourself. That was all I needed. The rest of the day moved with the slow momentum of a loaded spring. She texted me at lunch saying she'd be home late because of last-minute client adjustments before the big project. I didn't answer. At 6:45 p.m., I parked near the hotel and sat in the car until the lobby lights blurred through the windshield. At exactly 7:10, her car appeared. He was in the passenger seat. They didn't even bother with subtlety. She pulled right up to the entrance, and they walked in together, side by side. From where I sat, I could see the front desk clerk nod toward the bar area. A few minutes later, another woman walked in, mid-30s, sharp black coat, carrying herself like she belonged in every room she entered. I recognized her instantly from the charity photo on his company's website. His wife. She didn't go to the desk. She went straight to the bar. 10 minutes passed. Then the shouting began. Hotel bars aren't built for drama. The walls carry sound, and the lobby fills with echoes. I heard her voice first, low but cutting, asking him about dates, receipts, and the smell of her perfume in his car. He tried to pull her aside, but she stood her ground. My fiancée looked frozen, a hand hovering near her glass like she'd forgotten what to do with it. The argument escalated fast. He denied. She produced something, papers, maybe printouts, and slapped them onto the bar. Patrons started watching openly. Staff tried to intervene. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. She turned to my fiancée and called her by name, loudly enough for everyone to hear, and said, "You wrecked my marriage, and you're going to regret every second of this." The bar went silent. My fiancée tried to speak, but the wife cut her off, picked up her bag, and walked out. I didn't move from my seat in the car. I didn't need to. The scene had done its work. By the time I got home, my phone was already buzzing with messages from mutual friends. Is it true? What happened at the hotel? Why didn't you tell us? I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my email and sent final cancellations to the last remaining vendors: the venue, the officiant, the transportation service. I attached formal letters, citing irreconcilable issues, and requested refunds or credits. Every confirmation that came back went straight into the private account. Around 9:30 p.m., she walked through the door. Her hair was mussed, makeup streaked, and she looked more furious than apologetic. She dropped her bag on the counter and started with, "You won't believe what," but I cut her off with a flat, "I already know." That was all. I didn't ask questions. I didn't raise my voice. I went into the bedroom and locked the door. The less she could read from me, the less she could counter. Saturday morning, I made my move. While she was still asleep, I packed my essentials, the folder of documents, and the thumb drive. I left the rest, the apartment, the furniture, the shared bills, untouched. Before leaving, I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a printed statement of every wedding payment, every refund, and the current balance in my account. At the bottom, in plain text, it said, "Everything is canceled. The rest is yours to explain." I drove to a friend's spare apartment and settled in. From there, I watched the fallout. By midday, her father called. His voice was tight, controlled. He didn't ask me for proof. He said he had already heard enough from others and was withdrawing his financial support for her business venture. He called her behavior reckless and an embarrassment, and told me to take care of myself. I thanked him and ended the call. By evening, the chain reaction was in full swing. The other man's wife posted a vague but pointed message online about ending a chapter with someone who didn't value trust. People connected the dots instantly. My fiancé's social media accounts went silent. Friends who had been in our wedding party removed her from group chats. Word was spreading faster than she could contain it. Late that night, I got one more email from a vendor, the photographer. He confirmed the transfer of our credit to my name only and included a note saying, "If you need this for another event down the line, just let me know." And, I'm sorry, that simple sympathy from a stranger hit harder than anything she had tried to say in months. By the end of part 3, The structure of her life was bending under the weight. Her lover's marriage was cracking, her own engagement was over, her business funding had evaporated, and the wedding she thought was still on the rails no longer existed anywhere but in her imagination. What she didn't know yet was that the final move wasn't public humiliation. It was something quieter, a closing of doors she wouldn't even notice until she tried to walk through them. By Sunday morning, I had no reason to speak to her again. The apartment was no longer mine in any way that mattered. I'd transferred my name off the lease, rerouted my mail, and locked down every account we had shared. The wedding website was deleted. The guest list spreadsheet was gone from the shared folder. What remained was silence, not avoidance, but the kind of void that forces a person to face their own noise. Midday, I got a call from the venue manager. She wanted to confirm I'd received the cancellation acknowledgement. I told her I had and thanked her for her discretion. She hesitated, then mentioned that my fiancé had called that morning trying to reverse the postponement, but the contract was already processed. The spot we had reserved for our date had been released. Someone else had already booked it. I could picture the moment she learned that, the dawning realization that I'd moved far ahead of her. Not long after, the florist emailed, confused. My fiancé had shown up in person asking about her bouquet order, only to be told it had been canceled and partially refunded weeks earlier. She'd apparently tried to argue, but the printed cancellation request with my signature ended the conversation. Each vendor I had spoken to over the past weeks was now an unmovable wall between her and the wedding she thought she could salvage. The first real crack appeared when her mother called me. She tried to sound neutral, asking if we could at least talk about rescheduling, but her tone carried panic. When I told her I was no longer engaged and the wedding was permanently off, she sighed like she'd been expecting it. Then she said something that confirmed what her father had hinted at. "You know," I warned her. I told her not to take things for granted. It was a strange admission, half defense and half accusation aimed at her own daughter. Meanwhile, the other man's wife had made her move. I didn't see the direct confrontation, but I heard about it from a mutual acquaintance. She'd filed for separation, emptied their joint account into her own, and changed the locks on their house. His job, apparently, was already on shaky ground due to unrelated complaints. This scandal was the last thing he needed. I didn't need to chase that fallout. It was happening on its own. By midweek, my fiancé finally tried to reach me directly. The first message was a long wall of text about misunderstandings, how things weren't what they seemed, and how we could work through this. I ignored it. The next day, she sent another, shorter, sharper, accusing me of sabotaging her life and spreading lies. I ignored that too. The truth was doing fine without my voice behind it. On Thursday, I learned through her cousin that the business venture her father had been funding was officially dead. The initial investment had been pulled, leaving her with invoices she couldn't pay and suppliers demanding deposits back. Her cousin said she'd broken down during a family dinner, blaming me for ruining her future. Nobody seemed to agree with her. The social fallout followed quickly. People who had been part of our wedding party unfollowed her online. 2 friends she'd counted on for support stopped answering her calls after they learned about the hotel incident from someone who had been there. Her reputation, at least in our shared circles, was in free fall. I stayed quiet through all of it. No public statements. No posts. No interviews with mutual friends. My last word to her was the printed note I'd left on the counter, and I had no intention of adding anything else. The final blow came from a place I hadn't expected, the photographer. Weeks after everything had unraveled, I received an email from him saying he'd had an inquiry from her about booking a smaller, private ceremony. He'd politely declined, citing that the credit from our canceled wedding was tied solely to me as the contract holder. The message was simple but carried weight. Even in trying to rebuild, she was blocked by decisions I had locked into place. That was when I knew it was over in every way that mattered. She had no venue, no funding, no support network, and no way to spin the story without the hotel lobby scene resurfacing. The man she'd been seeing was drowning in his own collapse, unable to shield her even if he wanted to. Every path forward was tangled in the same thread she'd pulled herself. I moved on without ceremony. The refunded money covered my relocation costs and gave me a clean start. The credits from vendors I kept in my name. Maybe I'd use them someday, maybe not. What mattered was that I had left with my finances, my credibility, and my peace intact. In the end, there was no shouting match, no revenge post, no grand reveal. Just the quiet dismantling of an entire life she had assumed was secure, undone piece by piece until there was nothing left to stand on. She would wake up every day in the same city, see the same people, and know they'd all heard the same story, and none of it came from me. That was the consequence, and it would last far longer than any wedding ever could. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.